Hey there, this video is about communication. When you're working with APIs, it's likely that you're working with other people. Maybe you're working with your internal team, maybe you're working with end users outside of your team, maybe you're working with clients or partners, and maybe you're working with your future self. When you're working with APIs and you need to document things about the code, communicating to your future self is equally important. So in Postman, communication can refer to API documentation. It can refer to publishing public documentation for your end users. And we can also be talking about source control. Let's go ahead and switch over to the Postman app. So here in the Postman app, I have a collection called Imager API. I'm going to go ahead and star it and bring it to the top here. You can see that Imager has used Postman to document their external API. So they have 82 requests. There's a few folders here. And if I drill down into each folder, I can load up example requests to access their external API. So in Postman, there's a few areas where you can add human readable descriptions. You can add it at the collection level, folder, request, and parameter level. So at the collection level, if I click the ellipses and hit edit, I see that I'm able to add a human readable description in Markdown. It looks like Imager has embedded a screenshot or an image. They're using headers to outline the steps for getting started. They have an unordered list, hyperlinks. There's code formatting. Looks like they might have a table in Markdown that talks about required parameters, query string parameters. So all this is how they're using Markdown to describe what this collection is about. And you could do the same thing at the collection level, folder level, request level. Request, you can see it directly underneath the request name, and also at the parameter level. So if I have a body for my post request and I have these parameters, I have the ability to add markdown descriptions here for each parameter that I'm talking about. So inside the Postman app, you can actually view the way this is rendered directly in the app. Here, for example, here's the collection description. And this is how somebody working with the collection in the Postman app can kind of consume this description. They don't have examples here for this particular endpoint, but we talked about examples earlier when we were making mock server requests, or mock server responses rather. So this is a good place. Say I don't have my access tokens yet, but I want to see what a sample response should look like. You can save an example response here under examples in the upper right corner. And so inside the Postman app, if I go ahead and click View in Web, so you can see I'm in a web browser right now. This is the private view of the documentation for this collection called Imager API. You can see by this URL here that it's a private view. I am able to access it because I'm logged in as myself. If I had shared this collection with any of my team members, they would be able to view it as well. So the documentation, it's in a web browser. It looks very similar to what we saw in the Postman app in the sidebar. You can see my header elements here in the introduction. You can see folders. And if I drill down to a specific request, you can see documentation about that request. You see the verb here, the request name, the URL, any metadata about that request. In the right-hand side, you see example request code. So say I'm making an app and I want to use Imager's generate access token request. I can go ahead and take a look at what that looks like, copy it to a clipboard, and then paste it directly into my app code. So going back to the top, you can see that you're able to indicate which programming language you want those code snippets to be in on the side. If Imager had used examples and saved example responses, then that would be also displaying here on the side. So this is the private view of the API documentation. If I want to publish it, so Imager has independent developers that are using their API. If I want to publish it to the public, I can go in this upper right corner and click Publish. And I see this page now where I can go ahead and select a certain environment to publish with this collection documentation. So if I have a sandbox and everyone has access to that sandbox, I can go ahead and provide credentials there. Or I can stub out, here's where you need to enter your access token and use placeholders for an environment as well. If I have a custom domain that I've already verified, I can go ahead and select that here. And then this little checkbox here, if I click it, I'll be submitting to the Postman API Network, and we'll see in a little bit what that looks like. There's custom styling options. So my team already has this logo in place. I can update the logo in my team profile if I want to, change what that looks like for the published documentation. And if I have brand colors, I can go ahead and put my hex values here to update the theme around my published page. I'm going to go ahead and click Publish Collection. And now at this, And now I can access the published documentation at this generated URL. I did not choose to publish it to a custom domain, but I can see that this is the external view that I can email somebody this link and they can see it. So it looks very similar to that private view, except this is available publicly. The other difference is the Run in Postman button up in the corner. So if I click Run in Postman, if you've seen that button before, it's pretty cool. It opens up this little modal. I already have Postman installed on my machine, so I can click this and import it into my instance of Postman. And I'm pretty sure that's how I actually pulled in Imager's collection to begin with in the first place. So I already have it. I'm not going to go ahead and click that, but you can see what that looks like. If they had embedded an environment with this documentation, it would pull in both the collection and the environment. So I think Imager has actually published this at their own on their own custom domain. So they have a dev portal. They link to this API documentation, and this is exactly what we saw earlier in our published documentation. Except they've actually added their branding around it. So cool. Let's go back to the slides. All right, we took a look at descriptions in Markdown. You can add that at the collection, folder, request, and parameter level. It's a GitHub flavored style of Markdown. You're able to add formatted tables, embed screenshots and GIFs, be really descriptive when you're communicating with people that are using your API. Examples, you can either save a response from an active endpoint, or you can mock an example from scratch. We saw what private documentation looks like, and we actually published public documentation. It looks very similar, except adding it to the API network makes it discoverable to other developers, and you can theme it according to your own logo and brand colors. The public documentation does have the Run in Postman button. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the Sharing Collections video, but the Run in Postman button is a very easy way for people to pull the collection directly into their instance of Postman. And let's go ahead and scooch back over to the Postman app. So we just saw how to publish public documentation for your API. If you check the checkbox to submit your collection documentation to the API network, it's very discoverable from within the Postman app. Go ahead and click this orange New button in the top left and tab over to API network. And you can see all the different APIs that are available in this directory. So if I was looking for Imager's API, I could go ahead and type that in here, and I see that Imager does indeed have an API that they are making available through the Run in Postman button. So clicking this Run in Postman button will do the same thing as if I went to their dev portal, their API documentation page. It will pull in an instance of the collection and an environment if they had one directly into Postman, and that's how you can get it to show up here in the sidebar. Something else that's important to people is source control. So say there's multiple people working on this collection. Maybe there's QA, maybe there's developers, maybe there's technical writers. So there's multiple people that are working on this collection, making updates, and they're syncing in real time to their team workspace. So how do I know what's going on? If I click this arrow next to the collection name and tab over to activity, I can see who is making modifications to this collection. So if I scroll down, I can see the history of activity that's going on with this collection. And for Postman Pro and Enterprise users, there's this little link that shows up here so that if I don't like some change that somebody made, or we've decided as a team to roll something back to a certain point in time, you can actually restore it with this link here. And then for Postman Pro and Enterprise users, there's also the ability to generate diffs. So in this case, this is very similar, this is very simple. Somebody just added 2 lines of text, but any kind of change made to the collection, you'll see a diff generated. And then if I don't like that change, I can go ahead and click restore to roll it back to a certain point in time. So these activity feeds are available at the workspace level, the collection, the user, and the team. So at any of those levels, if I want to see what's going on, the activity feed is a really good kind of rolling stream of activities. I switched back over to the web dashboard. And if I go ahead and click over, I'm in a particular workspace called Postman. If I tab over to integrations, I can see the different integrations that I have built into this workspace, that are active in this workspace. So Postman Pro and Enterprise users have pre-built integrations that they can use to do various things. So if I go ahead and tab over to Browse Integrations, you can see this is where I have access to my Postman API if I want to access my collections, mocks, monitors, and environments. There's converters, there's monitoring and data integrations. Say I want to back everything up to GitHub or GitLab. Every time I make a collection, change to a collection, it'll go ahead and push a change to an existing repository. And then say I want to be alerted every time something happens, I can go ahead and set that up and pipe it in through Slack or whatever your chat platform is. So a lot of pre-built integrations that allow you to stay up to date and integrate with your existing tools. So we took a look at the Postman API network. If you're going to be publishing public documentation, I'd recommend submitting it to this API network. It makes your API a lot more discoverable to people that you're already working with and people that know nothing about your API. There are some features for source control within the Postman app. You have an activity feed that's available at the collection level, the team, workspace, and at the user level. There's a lot of pre-built integrations that allow you to stay up to date with status as well. And in summary, when we're talking about communication in Postman, we're referring to API documentation. It's a very robust feature that we've seen a lot of adoption with. There's a private view for your team or yourself to access, and there's also a published view for external partners. The Postman API network is a way to make your API discoverable and easily importable into the Postman app. And there's activity feeds and integrations that allow you to keep tabs on the activities that are going on with your collections.